So everyone knows you need to playtest your games. It is by far one of the most important things that you can do to take your game from being okay or even bad to being really good. But I've noticed that one thing that people don't really seem to talk about in the design process is the solo playtesting. Now, I want to do a lot, and I want to talk a lot about playtesting because it is so incredibly important to your game design. But there is so much to go over. I'm actually going to be splitting it up into a couple different parts. And in this part specifically, I want to talk about the playtesting phase where you as the designer are going to playtest your own game. And when I say playtest your own game, I don't mean like you're going into a convention and running the playtest. That's going to happen all the time. And unless you have kind of an extended network of people who are going to help you playtest, that's going to be primarily how you're going to playtest once you're kind of out in the field. What I want to talk about is the playtesting where it's literally just you, a bunch of cut out pieces of paper, and some tokens you bought off Amazon or wherever, and yourself, and you're going to sit there and playtest mostly just in your own head. Part of getting your game to the table as quickly as possible is trying to find some way to represent it on the table, because you're going to need some physical way to show how the game works and what the parts are. And this is a bit of where the arts and crafts of being a game designer come into play. And it's just a part of being a game designer. It's being good at arts and crafts. Now, you don't have to have anything fancy to represent your game. I sometimes get a little bit ahead of myself, and since I do a lot of the art and graphic design for my games, I kind of like to have all of my pieces looking like how I feel like they should, and I end up kind of designing around a lot of my mechanics around how I think the game should look on the table. But you don't have to do that. You can just cut up pieces of paper to represent your cards. You can just use little, cardboard cutouts that you write on if you're doing miniatures or points or whatever. So what I'm trying to say is that it doesn't have to look perfect. It doesn't have to look good. It just has to be enough for you to be able to figure out what is on the table. And that's all it takes. This is something that you can do in, depending how big your game is. I mean, if you're doing a 4X game, it's going to be a lot of arts and crafts. But if you're doing like a light to mid-weight game, it doesn't have to take you a long time to get those pieces done. Just cut up a bunch of pieces of paper, write on them, and that's all you need. Because it's just you sitting down at the table and trying this out. You don't need to spend a bunch of time, getting your arts and crafts done to represent your game. And the less time you spend getting it to the table, the better. Because that means you're going to be able to spend more time playing it when it's there and figuring out what you need to do for your next step. But you see, one of the things that's really important to understand is that you don't need a ton of fancy components or really the ability to do graphic design and illustration to be able to test your game. I mean, when it's just yourself sitting at the table, again, by yourself, anything will do. I mean, for example, like I have these 3 bags of tokens. I don't even know what games these are from. I think they might have been games that I think I got rid of at one point because I found I wasn't playing them anymore. But I just decided to keep the components so I could work on playtesting with them. And, they don't have to be games that you got rid of. You could just grab them from whatever game. I remember for a long time when I was working on the Exorcism at House of Monkton Falls, I would just pull meeples and tokens out of Lords of Waterdeep, or even occasionally like Descent. Really, any game you have that has a lot of pieces that, you can spare for a little bit of time, even if it's just for an evening, you can just grab them from there and just throw them on the table and start working on them however you need. Solo playtesting as a designer can be kind of one of the most intimate experiences that you can have with your game. And I know that sounds weird, but it really is. Now, when you're playtesting by yourself, obviously you're going to be playing, both sides or kind of all of the sides of the game. But essentially what you're trying to figure out is kind of this term I call, will it play? And that's actually kind of based on an old SNL skit with Will Ferrell. That's absolutely hilarious. You should look it up. But it's this concept of will it play. It's when you get it down to the table and you really only have the rules in your head is, does it work? Can it work? Is it fun how it works? Do the mechanics that you've set forward actually interact in an interesting way? Because you can spend all the time you want on a design doc. I've had games that I've been working on where I've had a design doc that I've been working on for months, literally months, and I'll have a 15-page design doc that kind of outlines how everything plays. But the first time I get it to the table and I go through my process of, does it play? And it just doesn't. And it's either it's not fun, or something about it doesn't work quite right, or the way that I wrote it and imagined it in my head isn't exactly what's happening. And that's why you need to have these kind of solo playtests. You need to get to the table with all of the rules in your head, or a design doc, kind of a surface level design doc, and figure out, is it actually going to work the way that I think it's going to work? Because a lot of times you might find out that even though on paper it looked like things were going to interact in a specific way that was going to create an interesting experience, they might not. And that's not your problem as a designer. I mean, that's going to happen. Nothing really works the way that we think it's going to work in our head, and that's why it's so incredibly important to get your game designs to the table as quickly as you can. Remember, as you're playtesting your game by yourself, it's important to remember you're not trying to win. And don't worry, I know you can't actually win when you're playing a game against yourself. I mean, you can't win so much as you can't lose either. Because what you're trying to do is just figure out how it plays. And I know that depending on what style of game you're making, this can be really hard or really easy. Now, when I was working on the Exorcism House of Moncton Falls, this was a lot easier because Moncton Falls was a co-op game. So it naturally lends itself to be able to be played solo. Mainly because cooperative games are kind of like big puzzles that you play together. And playing it by yourself, while it makes it a less fun and more challenging experience, is still rather easy as a designer. Now, that's kind of on the easiest end of the spectrum. The hardest side, if you're trying to make a competitive deduction game or something that relies on players not being able to share information, that makes it a lot harder. But those are sometimes special cases. There aren't a lot of games like that. And if you are making a game like that, you then might want to invest the help of either another designer or someone who's very, very familiar with game design, or at least the mechanics that you're working with, to playtest with you. But for the most part, you should be able to play the game by yourself in a way that won't break the game by you knowing all the information. And don't be afraid to change the rules of your game as you play. If you notice that something like, oh, I don't feel like I have a lot of decisions I can make because I only have 3 cards in my hand, then don't limit yourself to 3 cards. If you feel like something isn't working, change it. So if you feel like 3 cards is enough, have 4 cards in your hand. If you feel like, oh, this card doesn't do enough damage, or you don't get enough points for this card, change it on the fly. Because when you're playing by yourself, it's literally like a make or break. You really need to find out as quickly as possible, is this going to work? Will it play? And by changing things as you're playing them, you can very, very quickly and very, very easily see if your game requires small tweaks or something much larger. And if it's something that requires a bit more, and kind of one of these larger changes, don't feel bad going back to your desk and going back to your design doc, writing something down, changing it up a little bit, and cutting out a couple new cards and trying it again. This isn't a committed process. You don't need to get to the table and feel like, yes, this is good, or yes, this is going to be great. It doesn't have to feel that way, and you shouldn't get discouraged if it does. I know there's been a lot of games that I've worked on that I've kind of put on the shelf or put on the back burner because in its first couple of playtests, I couldn't get it to work the way I wanted it to, or it didn't play the way that I had hoped it would. And I got really discouraged. And that's something I really want to put forward, is don't get discouraged. I really hate the term, fail fast, fail often. Like, that's a very jargony business thing that gets said a lot for like small businesses and startups. But in game design, it's the most true it has ever been. Because designing games is an iterative process, and you need to learn as your game fails and breaks. Because that's the only way it's going to work. I mean, game design is such an incredibly complicated thing that it can't exist only in our heads. We have to get it on the table. We have to try it out. We have to see if it works, see if it plays. And if it doesn't, we have to go back and we have to fix it, and we have to change things. So really, you can't get discouraged, because if you do, you're going to find yourself never finishing a game, never getting to the end of a project, and having all of these kind of half-baked games sitting in your closet. I'm not saying I have that. I mean, I have a few of those. But you really can't get yourself into that vicious cycle of getting it to the table, it doesn't work the way you wanted it to, and then scrapping it. You can't do that. It's something I wish I could have told myself, years ago when I first started working on game design. And it's really the biggest point I want to make in this video is, don't be afraid when your game doesn't work. It's not going to work at first, and you need to be okay with that. And it's hard. It's very hard, and it's very discouraging. But what you'll find is, if you can accept that your game isn't going to work in the first playtest, and you can, go back to the drawing board, fix things, make little tweaks, make big changes to get it working and getting it to where you want it to be, then you're going to be an incredibly successful designer. You're going to be very successful at the process, and you're going to make incredibly good, incredibly well fine-tuned games, because you had the ability to let things go. Being able to pick out what's working and what's not, even if they're mechanics that you really liked, at the end of the day, it's going to make a better game, and it's going to make you a better designer. So that's it for this video on playtesting. I hope you found it informative. I hope you found it useful. This really is a video about learning not to be discouraged and learning about kind of the initial struggles of being a game designer. Solo playtesting is very, very hard. If you have any questions for me, you can leave a comment in the comment section below on YouTube. If this is the first video you've seen of ours, check out the YouTube channel. We've got a bunch of other videos up there. You can come talk to me on Twitch. We're on Twitch either Monday or Thursday night, depending what's happening. I post stuff on Instagram. You'll be able to follow me over there. But if you like the video, leave it a like. Give us a follow if you want to see more of these. And check out our blog as well. We actually just did a post about where to source board game components from. Now, maybe not for your first playtest, but a little bit later on when you're trying to make things look a little bit nicer, a little bit fancier. I threw in a whole bunch of recommendations about different manufacturers and print-on-demand services that you can use to get really cool-looking playtest components and even prototype components. So go ahead and check that out. But anyway, thank you for watching, and good luck with your designs.